Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because we're jumping right into episode 3, Zero Trust Explained. We're going to take a really fascinating journey today, starting straight from the foundational core philosophy of zero trust and taking it all the way down into the actual nitty-gritty technical implementations inside Microsoft Entra ID. We aren't just talking about abstract concepts up in the clouds today. We are literally turning theory into keys. By the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly how these security controls work and, more importantly, how to actually configure them.
Okay, let's dive into this. For years, the IT world relied heavily on the traditional perimeter. It was essentially a castle and moat approach, right? You built incredibly high firewall walls, you routed everyone through a 4-wall VPN, and hey, if you were inside that network boundary, you were trusted. Simple as that. But look at the modern approach right next to it. That old model, it's completely shattered. Today's reality features a massive remote workforce, thousands of cloud applications, and incredibly complex hybrid environments. Your employees are accessing corporate data from their living rooms, coffee shops, and mobile devices, completely bypassing those traditional perimeters. The castle's gone, and the moat has completely dried up. Now, if you're an IT pro, or maybe you're currently studying for your SC300 or SC200 certifications, rest assured, we're going to cover both the high-level architecture you need to understand and the crucial hands-on configurations you'll absolutely be tested on. Here's the quick look at our agenda for today. First, zero trust first principles. Second, Entra ID and security operations. Third, configuring conditional access policies. Fourth, troubleshooting and common mistakes. And finally, we'll wrap up with a real-world lab challenge. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Zero Trust First Principles. Before we even think about touching any configuration keys or clicking around in the Azure portal, we absolutely have to lay down the foundational philosophy. Because, let's face it, you can't implement what you don't fully understand. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the security policy enforcement engine right in the center of the architecture. In a zero trust model, every single access request is treated like a slammed door that must be evaluated. Notice how all the signals on the left, whether it's from user identities, corporate devices, or unmanaged personal devices, they all feed into that central engine. Every single request has to be logged, authenticated, authorized, and strictly inspected for anomalies, completely regardless of where it originates, before it's ever allowed to reach your data and apps on the right. So this brings us to the very first pillar of zero trust: verify explicitly. You simply cannot just accept a simple password anymore. That's old school. Security must evaluate the entire context of a request. Who is the user? Where are they located right now? Is their device healthy and compliant with our company policies? Are there any weird anomalies in this specific sign-in attempt? We are verifying based on all available data points every single time, no exceptions. The second pillar is use least privileged access. Giving everyone standing administrator rights is basically a recipe for an absolute disaster. Instead, what we want to do is limit user access by utilizing just-in-time and just-enough access. You'll often hear this referred to as JIT and JEA. By coupling this approach with risk-based adaptive policies, we make sure that users only have the exact permissions they need right exactly when they need them, and only for as long as they need them. This dramatically minimizes the potential damage if an account actually does get compromised. And the final pillar, assume breach. Now, this requires a very urgent, proactive mindset. You have to design your environment under the total assumption that an attacker is already inside your network. Your primary goal is to minimize the blast radius of a compromised identity. How do we do that? We segment access across our networks, users, and devices. We verify end-to-end encryption everywhere, and we're constantly driving threat detection using advanced analytics. Do not let an attacker move laterally. You've got to lock them down in a tiny, isolated box. Moving right along to Section 2, Entra ID and security operations. Okay, so those are the 3 theoretical pillars. Now let's shift our narrative just a bit. Let's look at the actual engine powering these security operations out in the real world, Microsoft Entra ID. This is where all that theory becomes your daily operational reality. Just take a second to absorb that number on the screen. 6.5 trillion. That is the number of signals Microsoft Azure AD Identity Protection analyzes every single day from internal and partner sources. It uses this unfathomable amount of data to identify threats and calculate risk. It really makes the sheer scale of cloud security tangible, doesn't it? You literally have the power of trillions of daily data points backing up your local security decisions. Next up, Section 3, configuring conditional access policies. With that massive analytics engine running in the background, we're moving into the practical application phase. Think of this next section as your tactical mission briefing to lock down compromised identities using conditional access. Now, I really want to call out a major focus area for those of you preparing for the SC300 exam. Look closely at this table differentiating user risk from sign-in risk. It is absolutely vital for your identity security operations team to understand the difference here. User risk is the offline, accrued likelihood that an identity has been compromised, usually based on past behavior and leaked credentials found on the dark web. Sign-in risk, on the other hand, is evaluated in real time during the actual authentication attempt. Sign-in risk can be remediated right then and there with multi-factor authentication, whereas user risk generally requires a full password change to mitigate that accrued offline risk.
Let's move to and see how this builds when you're actually sitting at the Azure portal. Here is your exact click path for creating a sign-in risk policy. First, you navigate through security, down to conditional access, and hit New Policy. Second, you define your scope by carefully choosing your users or groups. Third, you select your target apps. Fourth, under Conditions, you slide that toggle to configure your risk levels. Usually you're setting this to medium and high. And finally, fifth, under Access Controls, you set your grant control. Notice the configuration checkboxes right there under the grant controls. You can enforce Require Multi-Factor Authentication to handle real-time sign-in risk. Or if you happen to be building a user risk policy, you can select Require Password Change. This is exactly how you force a compromised user back into a secure, known state before they ever get a chance to access your apps. Just before we leave the configuration phase, I've got a rapid-fire exam tip for our SC300 candidates. Pay very close attention to the limitations of pass-through authentication when you're designing your hybrid identity setups. Remember this, sign-in features not natively supported by Azure AD, like smart cards, cannot be used here. Furthermore, if an on-premises password has expired, it cannot be updated directly on an Azure AD joint device. The user's going to have to use a browser to update it first. So keep these little limitations in mind when designing your authentications. All right, let's get into Section 4, Troubleshooting and Common Mistakes.
Okay, transitioning into operational pitfalls. Knowing how to turn the keys is great, but knowing what not to do? Well, that's what actually saves your job. Let's make sure you avoid these powerful yet super dangerous configuration traps. So the crucial point is you have to be incredibly careful with your scope. A classic mistake is creating broad, block-all policies that accidentally lock out your entire organization. And yeah, that includes you. That is exactly why you always configure break glass administrative accounts that are specifically excluded from these policies. Another huge troubleshooting nightmare for your ID and SOC team? Having legacy security policies and modern conditional access risk policies enabled at the exact same time for risk remediation. They conflict, they cause wildly unpredictable outcomes, and they will absolutely ruin your weekend. Don't mix them.
Now, to avoid those weekend-ruining mistakes, you need this brilliant feature, the What If tool. Think of this as your ultimate safety net. It allows you to simulate user sign-ins under various hypothetical scenarios, say specific IP addresses, specific device platforms, or specific risk levels, so you can see exactly how your conditional access policies will behave before you ever roll them out to the production environment. Trust me on this one, always test your logic here first. Finally, Section 5, Real-World Lab Challenge. Well, we've covered the principles, the engine, the configurations, and the pitfalls. Now it's time to take all that theory to keys knowledge you've just gained and apply it directly to a thought experiment. I want you to imagine two massive organizations, Contoso Inc. and Woodgrove Bank. They are currently facing a severe crisis. Their staff use simple passwords as their primary authentication with absolutely zero MFA enforcement. They have unmanaged remote devices connecting from all over the world. They've just suffered a massive credential leak. And worse still, they have absolutely zero visibility into anomalous user behaviors. The traditional perimeter has failed them completely. What do we do? And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the tools we discussed today are so vital. To rescue these companies, we just map our solutions directly back to those zero trust pillars. We step in and enforce conditional access across the board. We verify explicitly by implementing mandatory MFA for all applications. We assume breach by utilizing identity protection to hunt down those leaked credentials and block risky sign-ins. And finally, we enforce device compliance to ensure those remote machines are actually healthy before we ever grant them access. So, you've seen the sheer power of identity protection and the precision of conditional access. I want to leave you with a challenge for your own environment. Knowing the massive blast radius of just a single compromised identity, What is the very first conditional access policy you are going to audit in your own tenant today? Get into that portal, run the What If tool, and start locking those doors. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I will see you in the next one.